the European leaders are, of course, trying to condemn the move of Trump's not government, Trump's
Administration, we call it.
administration, that's the word I was looking for, of Trump's administration moved to ban the Palestinian authority leaders from coming to the to New York, specifically for the United Nations General Assembly, and of course they are freaking out over it. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about it in the context of generally how we say the West, and sometimes America is included in the West, and sometimes not when it comes to encouraging the Palestinian terrorism. And we'll also, I think, before we even go into that, we'll talk about this. There's this organization, I'm not sure if I have, the International Association of Genocide Scholars. Yeah, you've probably never heard of it. Nobody ever does. But they've determined that what Israel is doing in Gaza is genocide. And I think I've seen like something, some tweet on X saying like, it's official. And they had the link to this. It had like 6 million views. Now that account might have been a parody. I'm not sure, but I think this general sort of like view of we just take this organization and as long as they have non-biased or non-partisan on their Wikipedia page, we know we can like trust them because they are the pinnacle of objective reasoning and objective determination. And yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James Valiant. And James, I'll go to you in a second. But yeah, I'll just add to this. I just love how, quickly we can jump on who to trust. Because even if you are this, if you love international law and you think that's the determination how we should sort of deal with other nations, the fact is that when it comes to determination of genocide, the ICJ and ICC, specifically if you're referring to countries or people, are the ones who are supposed to determine if there is a genocide or if war crimes have been committed. Now, again, that's if you believe in the international law, which I have problems with. But if you do, those are the organizations that are supposed to deal with it. The fact that somebody who believes in that supposedly goes to this like random organization says, "Hey, these guys who are quoting Haaretz and Amnesty International, who changed the definition of genocide for them, yeah, they've determined, so we're gonna go with that." James, any thoughts?
Well, boy, does this tell us the sad state of philosophy today. Look, when the Nuremberg war trials were going on, when we were talking about Nazi war crimes, crimes against humanity, they were not relying upon some esoteric definition of crimes against humanity, but one that people could relate to at least. Now, I'm not going to say that they had conceptual precision. I'm not going to say they had a proper ethics to go about it, but we're talking about big, broad ethical concepts here that should be easily explicable to the ordinary person. So rather than refer me to a panel of experts, that is if you're familiar with logic, that is the fallacy ad verecundium argument from authority. A pure, undiluted argument from authority, a subjectivist approach. Well, if this panel of experts says so, they must be right. It's beyond my capacity as an individual to understand whether crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide have occurred. No. And in fact, it's an evil so great that it shouldn't be that distant. It shouldn't be hard for the ordinary mind to reach that it requires an expert. And that by itself, the use of this argument from authority, this empty panel of experts, if it's crimes against humanity, we shouldn't need a panel of experts to tell us that it's a crime against humanity. Show me the facts that say it's a crime against humanity, much less genocide. Now, genocide has a very specific meaning as well, but the point is that it should make reference to the moral code to which it could be Christianity. Could be saying, well, we don't believe in violence and we believe in turning the other cheek. And so any civilian casualties, well, tell me that that is your moral basis. Or if you believe that there's such a thing as a valid war of self-defense, then tell me why this crosses over the lines. Nothing, for example, the embedding of journalists, one of the things that Europeans are objecting to, and some of these groups are objecting to, IDF allows journalists to be embedded. Journalists just roaming free in a war zone are taking a risk. And so they'll point to, hey, look at all these journalists who died. First, I don't buy their numbers on these things. But secondly, they've totally changed the standard on which there's some kind of Israeli blackout of the information. No, this is a typical thing that happens in war. And so very often, other typical things that happen during war. Now, going back to the Europeans, America is saying, look, you cannot, we cannot allow in these 80 Palestinian diplomats, not the ones who are already here, these 80 Palestinian diplomats. This sort of thing has been done by Americans before. Now, mind you, way back in the 1970s, Henry Kissinger laid out certain guidelines for that. There were times in the 80s when, again, America said, no, Yasser Arafat, you can't come and talk to. So what did they do? They had Yasser Arafat speak in Geneva. So this is not unprecedented, and it seems to me a perfectly reasonable request on the part of Israel and America to say, look, these guys have to meet certain preconditions before we let them over here and talk. That in itself is a moral compromise, in my view. Dating back to Henry Kissinger, we were acknowledging the legitimacy of something like Yasser Arafat or the PLO. But today, when they say, no, Abbas and his friends can't come without meeting certain conditions, now there's some kind of a higher standard. They don't have to recognize certain basic realities here. Renounce terror, renounce the teaching of terror, because that's what they're doing. They're still teaching terrorism to Palestinian kids. Okay, you got to renounce that. You got to stop that. You got to recognize Israel's right to exist in effect, or there's no negotiating, or you can't come over here. You have to renounce terrorism as such in principle, or we're not even going to begin to talk to you. Now, I myself would have an even higher standard, but Europeans are complaining because America has laid out a standard like that. Well, what does that do? European governments are rewarding terrorism, are saying terrorism is okay. They're giving a green light to terrorism when they object to America saying, no, these Palestinian, even the Palestinian Authority can't come in unless they meet certain, we renounce terrorism requirements, such as stop teaching terrorism to your kids. No. So Europe is actively on the side they're actively against Israel, and they're actively on the side of ongoing terrorism. And Palestinians have been violating every agreement that has been attempted to be made with Palestinians for the last 40, 50 years. So the point is, it's perfectly reasonable. And what Europeans are doing, as we've said many, many times, is simply rewarding the Palestinians and permitting their ongoing teaching of terrorism. They are perpetuating violence against Jews in Israel. They're perpetuating the endless war stuff. That's how you perpetuate the endless war stuff. They're not even putting some minimal requirements. Now, as I say, I myself would have much higher requirements before I'd even speak to these people. Okay? But consider going all the way back to this international organization, this panel of experts that says that genocide has occurred. No, they ought to be able to explain the basis for that. It just doesn't stand up for any scrutiny. Israel could have wiped out the populations of both the West Bank and Gaza by now just using conventional weapons, had genocide been their motive. It isn't. No, instead they're trying to get food into Gaza. They warn, unprecedented in the history of warfare, they warn people to get out of buildings before they bomb them. Absolutely bending over backwards, doing unprecedented things in the history of warfare. So an entirely new standard is being invented by these experts to declare Israel guilty of genocide. And what are we supposed to stop? We've been conditioned. We stop right where a panel of experts, and I guess that panel of experts is right. I guess this is genocide. I guess the ordinary Joe on the street wouldn't be able to tell genocide from a giraffe if it bit him in the rear end. No, if you're going to claim genocide, you better have facts. You better have facts that back it up. And they don't. And so it's this distinct lack of facts, a distinct lack of moral argumentation, because you'd lay out your moral standard. Let's say it's even one that I highly disagree with. A turn the other cheek, intrinsicist view, any killing, even in reasonable self-defense, is wrong. Well, if that's your moral standard, say so out loud. Say, okay, we oppose any time, even when you're acting in self-defense, the death of a single civilian is, for us, a war crime. But no, they neither lay out a moral standard, nor do they provide the facts that would cause an ordinary person to be able to say, oh yeah, I see, that's genocide there. I'm relying on a panel of experts. So much of today is deference to a panel of experts. And I don't care what the issue is, climate change, for example. Instead of saying, well, geez, have your models on climate change panned out? What does your model on climate change really rely upon? What are those premises? Why are your models never quite living up to reality? Well, no. We have a panel of experts for that. Panel of experts who's explained away the recent variations from what our models 25 years ago predicted. Same thing. It's a total abdication of the mind. It's a total subjectivism. In objectivism, we talk about how in the post-Kantian world, any real concept of objectivity has been replaced, thanks to the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, with the collective subjective. It's this group's truth. It's that panel of experts' truth. And so that's what we do. We end up by saying, okay, well, look, these are, a bunch of experts, self-proclaimed experts, but we've got a panel of experts here who say it's genocide. Therefore, it's genocide, according to that group. And that group determines reality. Their consciousness, in effect, determines reality. Now, this is the textbook case of how our culture is suffering from a lack of objectivity. If you were approaching these things objectively, you would see, well, wait a minute, it's perfectly reasonable on the part of America to say that they stop educating Palestinian kids in killing Jews and terrorism before we even talk to them. Or we won't call this genocide unless we have some facts to back it up, which they never do. They rely upon the lies of Hamas, and they always have, and they've been caught 1,000 times now. I'm exaggerating, only a little. They've been caught many times now repeating the lies of Hamas, as if the subjective truth, and that's the other thing. You get these doctors without borders, these physicians sans frontier. They're all okay. What their definition of what is a war crime or genocide, or who we will support or not? Again, it's the collective subjective replacing the objective, and journalists are sucked right into this mode. And journalists have been sucked right into this mode of deferring, one, to experts, deferring to people's subjective truths as people. See, this is the Palestinian truth. And it's not that, it may not be our Western truth, it may not be the Israeli truth, but it's it's their truth. And so we have to bend over backwards to accommodate the truth of the Palestinians. We have to accept without critical thought this panel of experts on what genocide means. No. You can think for yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. The facts are there. The facts that are available are the facts that are available. From that, you can infer yourself whether or not this is a genocide or not. And it ain't. And that's why they need a panel of experts. They need it to put as a front panel of experts, some organization that doesn't want to agree with you. No, journalists have intentionally given up any thought of objectivity in journalism. Now, some more and some less, I grant you. But even to the extent that these journalists are being sucked into this vortex of subjectivity, it is a philosophical issue. Really, only we objectivists can understand the what we'd call this, don't want to use a big fancy word, the psychoepistemological roots of the nonsense that we're being told here. Okay, so no, all we have to do is appease the Palestinian mentality when it comes to what? Bringing their people in to talk, even though they still demand the destruction of Israel, even though they still demand on the right to teach their children terrorism, even though they still demand these payments to terrorists continue going on. No, there can be no preconditions, because after all, it's the Palestinian truth. And what they'll end up doing is rewarding Palestinians for October 7th. by recognizing a state, or we defer to a panel of experts on what genocide means. This is rank subjectivism, ladies and gentlemen, rank subjectivism, and all warped. I mean, even the professionalism of journalism has been warped away from the truth. We don't take sides when there's a partisan matter, even in situations where it might be clear. Nope, they've chucked all that in. They take sides, and they take sides on what basis? Pure subjectivism. Pure subjectivism. That's the only way out, and only philosophy can help us machete our way through this jungle of BS subjective thinking, which is all it really is. But I can tell you, it has real world consequences. Reality is not created by someone's subjective awareness of it, or even a group's subjective awareness of it. By rewarding the Palestinians, European prime ministers and presidents, what you're doing is you're encouraging, creating, perpetuating more terrorism in the future. In reality, objectively.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that I want to go to, and I mean, even when you mentioned that Yasser Arafat was barred from entering the U.S., Yasser Arafat was barred from entering the U.S. until we gave him territory in the Oslo Accords, and then he could have come to the White House lawn. So again, even when it comes to sort of moral actions
And I,
against him,
and I
it
suspect
took
Trump
us.
would be the same. He'd have a boss over if a boss met the preconditions. Like I say, I'd have a much higher standard for whether I'd even talk to the Palestinian Authority. But there is precedent. All I wanted to point out is that Europe shouldn't be having kittens. They shouldn't be having a conniption fit. The European leaders should recognize America has done this before. This is not unprecedented, and it's perfectly reasonable. In fact, it's not enough reasonable, in my view, to set preconditions on whether or not we even talk to these monsters.
Yeah, and again, sort of like going back to this organization, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the more I sort of like research almost, I'm still young, but when I was a bit younger, I always saw giants in the world, like, America. Oh my, me, little boy in Eastern Slovakia. I mean, America, this great nation, this, like, I cannot even imagine somebody going there. I think well, I'm not. Well, my father went to America, so I'm not first. But it was really like a distant sort of like thing. Or, Harvard. Oh my God, Harvard or Columbia. And, after these past few years, it's, this bubble is popping very much so. And like,
There are many Americans who feel that same way about Europe, by the way. Just to turn it around. No, I myself feel lucky to be an American, but it's not because of Harvard and Columbia,
yeah,
who
and I
who
don't
are doing
mean.
everything they can to undermine what is America.
Yeah, and I don't mean that necessarily as America isn't. I think America is still great, and this is not even specifically about America, but specifically sort of like it- there was some kind of respect that I think came from school, especially something like United Nations, right? There is like a certain kind of respect you get for these organizations. But then, I mean, with this specific one, so when they published the paper or sort of it's not even a report really, it's sort of just them saying, yes, we say this is a genocide. That was 3 pages long. Uh, so not that much. The paper on ISIS was page and a half. How can you like again? This is like and even when it comes to I'm like reading specifically on ISIS. It says that ISIS perpetuated crimes against humanity, including murder, and it's like is murder like crime against humanity? I mean that's like you cannot even wage not justifying ISIS actions, of course, but that's where it matters the context of how did we get here. There is a difference even when it comes to killing. Like we recognize there is a difference between it really reminds me of people who cannot like really think in concepts or conceptually. Thing like, you know, pushing somebody like, I always I'm not sure who said it, but sort of like libertarians, or maybe specifically Robbie Murray Rothbard, don't understand the difference between pushing a grandma off a cliff and pushing a person, just on the street. And is that there is a difference. There is a difference when ISIS starts, in Syria and Iraq, starts basically trying to establish an Islamic caliphate, and that was their real goal. They wanted an Islamic caliphate across the whole of Middle East and further. There is a difference between that and killing somebody with that goal, and there is a difference between Israel killing Hamas terrorists, or even having the sort of unfortunately, civilians getting, or children or women getting killed in a crossfire when Israel is defending itself. But these organizations, they don't care. And again, what is the goal? Like, is the goal really for no country ever to defend yourself? Because if you, and this is another thing, like, if you really cared for any of these organizations, or let's say, I don't know how they are getting funded, but let's say you're somebody who is funding, any, organization, Amnesty International, something like that, and sometimes they call out good things that should be called out. But let's say you are supporting them. What do you do when they do something like this? Like, I've recently, I'm on dating apps, I'm on Tinder, and I saw a girl who worked at Amnesty International, and I swiped left, of course, because like I'm not getting involved with that kind of thing. Like, how can you really like put that, like really differentiate that, or what does that say about, let's say, ICC goes after Putin, goes after, I don't even know how many people, how many dictators in Africa, or in sort of like Southern Asia. But what does that say when they go after Netanyahu? Then I'm like doubting every single thing they've ever said. Like, okay, if you've decided that this guy is doing war crimes, then okay, you have no credibility for me anymore, and I don't trust a single thing you've said before. Now I can myself judge Putin, for example, but I haven't looked into all the other ones they say. So in that way, that their credibility just poofed away.
Yeah, that is exactly it. Their credibility vanishes. And as I say, the conceptualization of these things is absolutely vital. Murders happen in every country on this planet every year. And if a person murders someone because they're jealous because their partner's cheating on them, say, or they murder someone because there's a life insurance payout, that is not a crime against humanity. It's a horrible crime. It's unjustifiable. The person ought to be punished. We need protection from people who would commit ordinary murders, but those are ordinary murders. And if we're not going to make a distinction between ordinary murder and genocide, we're already headed down a very twisted conceptual path. The other thing is you have to recognize the difference between self-defense and aggression. And that is exactly the distinction that's being very overtly blurred by all this discussion about Israel. From the moment Hamas took control of Gaza, 20 years ago, they were lobbing rockets at Israel. They were already aggressive against Israel. Israel unilaterally pulls out 20 years ago. Hamas takes over, and what do? They don't just try and set up a government where a peaceful, prosperous place for their people to live in. No, no, no. What they do is they start attacking Israel. That's their whole raison d'etre. That's their whole reason for being. So the October 7th, in fact, waiting for October 7th was the West's problem. We were far too tolerant of aggression. And because we weren't clear about what aggression means and what it implies, even at the point when you're just lobbing rockets, Israel has a right to go in, take out Hamas, act in self-defense, eliminate the threat. After October 7th, which is the result of our appeasement of decades, it's still not clear in their minds the difference between self-defense. Every so-called Palestinian civilian casualty is the fault of Hamas. Every single one. If it comes from an IDF bullet or an IDF bomb, it is the fault of Hamas. As we keep stressing here right now, there's a difference between self-defense and aggression. Now, there have been many moral systems that have an intrinsicist view about killing, including, say, Christianity. You don't fight back. Someone hits you on the face, you don't run away, you don't block the punch. Heaven knows you don't fight back. You turn the other cheek and say, okay, hit me on this side. Okay, if you have, love your enemy, do good to the evildoer. If you have a Christian view of morality that says killing is intrinsically wrong, even if done in self-defense, then of course you're going to come out with some kind of position like this. I mean, in fact, the origins of just war theory back in the Middle Ages comes from a Christian context, where they're wrestling with this idea: how do we engage, even on nation versus nation, on international scale, how do we deal with this turn the other cheek business that Jesus taught? It gets even worse with Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant says, no, no, no. Your duty is your moral duty is your moral duty, and regardless of the consequences, you've got to do it. He completely separated consequences from morality. And so if you have a Christian or Kantian sort of view of things, then you'll end up, and this is why they don't state the moral basis for their belief, for example, that Israel is engaged in genocide, because they'd have to ground it in what? Christian ethics, or ground it in Kantian intrinsicism, because that's what's playing out here. What's also playing out, as I point out, is the collective subjective replacing the objective. See, we've got a panel of experts who say it's genocide, who say it's dead. These experts, what have they done? Have they studied the New Testament and Immanuel Kant's, argument for the categorical imperative? But in any event, it should be the kind of concept where the ordinary person, as I say, I explain to you this action, and therefore this killing is an atrocity, is wrong. But we have to be able to make a bunch of conceptual distinctions here and point to the facts of reality so that the concept is apparent, that the relationship between the abstract and the concrete, again, something that objectivism uniquely provides us today, ladies and gentlemen, in the philosophical context. The relationship between the abstract and the concrete is real clear. What the hell do you mean by genocide? Why is that a bad thing? Why is it bad to kill in self-defense? Why isn't that a good thing? As Ayn Rand said, everything that makes the aggressive use of force, the initiation of physical coercion, wrong, makes the use of physical force in self-defense right. It is the aggressors who have dictated the terms on which we have to deal with them. Europeans can evade that and say, no, no, okay, they've been violent, they want to be violent, they're still teaching violence, and they still get to teach violence, but nonetheless we'll recognize the Palestinian state, will have Palestinian Authority people happily come to the UN meeting. They're mired in bad ethics and subjectivism and relativism. They have no moral truth of their own. And they're dealing in a world of collective subjectivity, and one that defers to panels of experts, for example. No, but it's all really just a rationalization for, let me just say this out loud, my European leader friends, it really is grounded in, it's a rationalization for your anti-Semitism, for your own anti-Semitism. You'd think that your own guilt, European history, about the way you've treated Jews for almost 2,000 years now, climaxing in the Holocaust would be enough. But you also have guilt about the way you've treated what? Former members of the Turkish Empire, like the Arab states? Well, whatever your feelings of collective guilt, you have deep roots in anti-Semitism, Europe, whether Christian orthodoxy has lost its grip or not on you, you're still deep in the swamp of anti-Semitism, and all the rest of this is just philosophical window dressing for a rationalization, in effect, for your own collectivist-based bigotries.
We have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much, and a super chat from Gail, thank you so much. No, something I well just quickly wanted to bring up. Belgium has joined with the Western world in recognizing or sort of planning to recognize the
Planning,
Palestinian
right?
state at the upcoming UN General Assembly, which I'm a little bit surprised to see because I know. I think they have like five parties in their government right now. Not to mention some of them are also like have more subjects underneath them. But there were like two sort of pro-Israel party in the government, but the other three were pushing them to
See, the
what I think.
majority could get their act together to denounce Israel. Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
whatever their other sectarian differences, they could put those aside, and a majority could agree Israel's rotten. Let's have the Palestinians over, even if they continue to teach terrorism, even if they refuse to recognize Israel. Yeah, right, right,
Well, it
right.
was specific at the government. There was so it was like a discussion within the government. Um, did I read the super chats? Super chat from Bonnie and super chat from Gail. If I didn't, so thank you so much to both of you. I was looking in the comments because I wanted to. I wanted something to bring up. Somebody said, "Who's gonna talk about the idea of terrorism?" And I mean, I don't even want to comment on that specific one. But it sort of reminds me about, it is truly r- interesting. I don't know what I want to call it. I don't like luxury, maybe, is the fact that we are talking about should IDF be tougher or should it be not tougher? Because again, there were no such discussions during World War II. I mean, the fact was we were fighting for freedom. We were fighting against an absolutely dictatorial
D-Day,
state,
D-Day was
and
yeah, D-Day was this horrible act of British and American terrorism. We could be
yeah,
discussing British and American terrorism on D-Day. Well, northern France was filled with Nazi troops. And so it was an act of sheer terrorism, right?
yeah,
No.
and again, there
That's
is
why it's
this.
critical to make the distinction between aggressive action and reasonable self-defensive action. That's exactly the moral distinction that is here being ignored, evaded, conceptually blown past.
Yeah, and there is this really weird, and now here I might just be ignorant and might not know enough about it. But recently I've started looking into sort of the way Ukrainians are living on sort of the border of Russia or sort of close to the fighting line. And, they are living through their lives. They have, some of the school children have to like study in the metro to stay safe from the attacks. There are sirens where the Ukrainians don't even go hide because they are willing to take their chances. And in a similar way, in sort of in Gaza, we've seen a lot of videos about sort of the life is starting to go back. They have restaurants open. They sort of are have sort of a life. And yeah, maybe here I'm just ignorant, but this is like really weird to see that there is a war and sort of the life is still going. And I don't know if that is because of how much unwillingness there is to really fight wars in a way that Israel, like if this was truly a war, then Israel, that like this would have been done in like few weeks. But because of there is this still constant of like, let's see if we can drag it out for years. And I think it sort of applies in Ukraine as well, with the amount of holding back Ukraine has been sort of like forced to do, or has been convinced to do, or the ceasefire talks. um, so yeah, I don't know if there is much to say. Well, I'll throw in one more thing and then I'll let you comment. Something I've been thinking about is specifically, and we'll have to wrap up in a second. Sorry for that. Something that I've been thinking about is specifically the sort of the psychological afflictions of soldiers when it comes to fighting a war. Because I think I've read recently or somewhat recently an article of the idea of soldiers that are going home because of their psychological problems. And I'm wondering to what extent uh, would these same soldiers have psychological problems if we were really fighting the war properly. And I haven't looked into this much, but I'm wondering to what extent did Sherman forces in the South or Allied soldiers have like PTSD symptoms if they understood, okay, we are fighting a proper war, every person we kill, that's the fault of the enemy combatants. But if you are fighting the war on the Israeli side as IDF, you are supposed to feel guilty about every single civilian you kill or because of your strikes are killed. But that's wrong. That's not your fault. It is the fault of the enemy. And I'm wondering, I'm not sure if you have comments, to what extent is this psychological problems basically a philosophical problem
It
rather
is.
than,
It
yeah.
is fundamentally a philosophical problem. Between American soldiers, of course, suffered post-traumatic stress after every war to some degree. War is hell, as it has been pithily put by people long before me. There is nothing. Look, I would rather there not have been the need for war. I would rather not have to bomb. I would rather not have to kill another human being. In situations where you have to kill, even in reasonable self, I know this as a former prosecutor. If you're confronted with a situation of violence, responding with in a violent way, uh, it makes good sense, but it's still something you're going to have to live with, even if you acted in perfect self-defense. So will always be, because it's a the difference is moral clarity. At the end of World War II, there were cases of PTSD. There was depression, anxiety, suicide, you name it, but at a much smaller rate than after Vietnam, a much smaller rate than after Afghanistan. American soldiers suffered much, much higher rates of post-traumatic stress, depression, suicide. And the real difference is, and I think that there have been, and I wish I had the citations here for you, but there have been observations that it was a question of the moral clarity that people brought to it. When American soldiers came back from World War II, they were hailed as heroes who did a psychologically difficult thing. In fact, their psychological state was sympathetically handled in the culture. You can look at movies and literature from the 1940s and 1950s, which have a great deal of sympathy for soldiers doing a morally right thing and fighting the Nazis or the Japanese. And we're tending to say, okay, but you were doing the morally correct thing. If you don't think you were doing the morally correct thing, you will have psychological problems. You will have mental dissonance. You will have, did I kill this innocent person wrongly? You know, and the innocence of that person now becomes important to you in a way that, okay, I helped bomb Dresden. I can live with that because I'm defeating this evil Nazi, right? You're perfectly aware of what you're doing. Yet for a civilized person, that's not an easy thing to do because you have to be conceptually aware that it takes a conceptual abstract awareness when you're engaged in war to know you're on the morally right side. That is why it is an imperative. There's a relationship between your moral certainty and your psychological state after the war. It is very closely related. And if we don't, a friend of mine who was a Vietnam vet, he gets off the plane at LAX from Vietnam wearing his uniform and his, two brown stars, and teenage girls pass him by and say, baby killer. He goes right into the men's room, changes into jeans and a t-shirt, throws his uniform in the trash. When the moral question, when you're questioned as a baby killer. I'm not going to get into the details of Vietnam, but our American soldiers were not mostly baby killers there. I mean, we should never have engaged in the war. That is true. But when there's a moral question about the rightness of what you did, there's a direct relationship to the psychological fallout it's going to have on the veterans, a direct one. And it seems almost self-evident to me, but there have actually been studies that show this. It's because of America's lack of moral clarity on issues like Vietnam or Afghanistan that caused such huge numbers of depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicide, you name it. And it's a question of the moral rightness and legitimacy of what you were doing in World War II that caused so many fewer incidents of that. There's a direct relationship between philosophy and the psychological hell that soldiers, when we ask them to do these things, go through. It is incumbent on the nations involved to give the moral clarity to their soldiers so that they don't suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and think that maybe they did something wrong. Well, the world says I did something wrong. These teenage girls said I'm a baby killer. Of course you're going to feel depression. Of course there are going to be higher rates of suicide. That is a question of morality. Is the power of morality in action, in the real life psychological consequences to these soldiers? Absolutely.
Yeah, and in some ways, do you have time to go a bit longer, or do you need to go?
Sure. A few more minutes,
Uh,
sure.
okay. Because something more that I've been thinking about, that I've been sort of wrestling with, and I'm really making my really making the worth of the €5 or whatever I paid for the Sherman's March to the Sea, because there are some entries there about sort of the actions the soldiers did under him, meaning like sort of like plundering the land, or I think. I don't think there was specific instances of sexual violence, at least not mentioned there, but I'm sure that is something that does happen during a war. And again, there is this. I'm I'm not. Or when it comes to a specific idea of soldiers, people post pictures of them, like playing in sort of like Palestinian houses, or something similar, and they're calling, oh, this is like barbaric. But I was really trying to like think of that in a way, like like in a sense, what do you expect a soldier to act during a war? Do you expect civility? Do you expect that this is like a normal state of affairs, that one side starts a war and you expect from the other side to simply, uh, you know, like in a sense, like act human, or sort of like have fully like civilized acts? Like the fact is, you started this like barbaric act, like in a way, it cannot be fought civilly or civilized.
You have to do violent things. You have to do horrible things. On the other hand, you don't have to engage in torture. You don't have to engage in needless violence. You
Yeah,
don't have to engage in rape. You don't, and it
yeah.
is,
I'm not trying to like condone
and nor
those
does
actions,
it,
of
and
course.
nor do any of those things actually further the interests of the party that's acting in reasonable self-defense. And in fact, nations like Israel and the United States have codes of military justice that will prosecute such crimes committed by their soldiers. Is precisely the difference in the level of civilization between the aggressor and the defender that makes the defender, of course, more morally aware. Look, they're the ones acting in reasonable self-defense. That is why they should have the moral clarity. And that moral clarity should include sticking to your moral superiority. That is to say, we're not going to engage in gratuitous, needless violence because that's going to be counterproductive. It's going to be counterproductive to our efforts, one. And two, the soldiers involved are going well beyond their orders when they engage in such atrocities. And there is, in my view, there should be rules against the atrocity. Now, when a war happens, it means you have to do horrible things, as you pointed out. Yes, of course we do. Civilians have to die. Children will have to die. Hospitals may have to be bombed. That's just the way it is. And if that's the way it is, if that is required to end the war quickly, I mean, it's obviously going to be more humane for you, but it's also going to be more humane for the enemy to end the war as quickly as possible. If it ends the war as quickly as possible, shatters the enemy and causes them to surrender unconditionally, then you've achieved your goal. You've achieved your goal. It doesn't serve anyone's interest to kick prisoners of war gratuitously, just to use a simple example. And is there anger? Is there absolute anger? Are you going to have to hold back the reins on human psychology, which is saying, look, you attacked my country. I'm going to take out my anger on you, this individual, regardless of his personal moral status. Okay. Obviously, it is our moral clarity. It is our moral clarity that makes both, that requires both. That requires us both to recognize that the killing of civilians if we're acting in self-defense, is the fault of the aggressor. We're doing horrible things. We're going to kill women and children. Yeah, guess what? We're going to kill women and children. That's the way it has to be. On the other hand, it's that same moral clarity that says, no, we're the good guys. We are not going to advance our cause by engaging in truly gratuitous, needless violence. And it's exactly that kind of moral clarity that's going to help the soldier when the war is all over. Look, we had moral standards. We engaged in the war properly. We weren't just as bad as they were. I mean, once upon a time in warfare, go back in the Wayback Machine, these people were proud to count the number of, let's see, in biblical law, David and Saul were vying over how many, they used to, like Native Americans would count their casualties by the number of scalps they took from their enemy, to the count scalps. In ancient Hebrew warfare, apparently, it was the number of foreskins, because they would forcibly circumcise the corpses of the non-Jewish bodies that they conquered. So they would say, King Saul had collected so many foreskins, King David collected even more foreskins. Kind of gross. But here they are boasting, in effect, about the number of casualties that they inflicted. In fact, even in World War II, you could see this. The casualty numbers of Germans versus Americans in France after D-Day, for example, was a very importantly followed statistic. We want to kill more Germans than they're killing Americans, as Patton's army is racing through central France to get to the German border. I mean, that is a good thing. Killing Germans during World War II is a good thing. Good thing. Now, does that mean, am I making a moral judgment about every single individual soldier or every single person who was killed in the course of that? No, I'm not. Self-defense does not, the question doesn't turn on the moral status of the thing that's attacking me. It could be a 9-year-old boy, but who was obviously been propagandized by his parents, shooting me from behind a rock over there. Do I have to just sit there and take his shots? No, I can shoot back. And you might say, well, he's just a child. He was brainwashed by his parents. Yeah, but he was a physical, deadly threat to me. My right of self-defense does not turn on the moral status of the aggressor, even. It doesn't turn on the moral status of the people I need to kill now because you, Mr. Hitler, Herr Hitler, you started this war. You are responsible for all the civilian casualties. All of them. You're responsible for our deaths and the deaths of Germans. It is only the field of morality that can sort this out. And going back to soldiers, by the way, can sort this out and reduce the mental health consequences of engaging in war. Only moral clarity can give that to the soldier. You did it because you had to do it. There are still soldiers from the Iraq conflict, for example. Oh, I had to kill this child because, look, he was with someone who was wearing a suicide device. Are you going to live with that for the rest of your life? I killed a child. He's obviously morally innocent. But I did it to defend our base from getting a bomb and advancing the enemy's cause. No, obviously, these are very difficult things for the soldier to have to deal with and live through, but they can only be dealt with by philosophy, by the moral clarity of what self-defense requires and doesn't require, and how we went about the war, and whether we were justified, and whether we were the victims of aggression and therefore needed to take the steps that we did. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to live with yourself about, hey, I killed that child. Yeah, you killed the child, but you did it in rational, moral self-defense. And it is exactly these kind of moral distinctions that are completely blurred over when we defer to a committee of experts on what the very meaning of the word genocide is. No, I should be able, in simple, clear, moral terms, to explain to you what genocide is, why it's a horrible thing, right? And I should be able to very concretely give you the tools so that you can distinguish between a case of, well, they killed a lot of people in valid self-defense versus genocide. This is not something we need a panel of experts for. These are basic moral concepts, and if you had a clear view of morality, you'd be able to parse them You'd be able to explain exactly when it was good and when it was bad, and what was right and what was wrong, and what crosses that, and when that line gets crossed. Israel is morally, qualitatively superior. It, for example, does not go for civilian casualties gratuitously. I think they should be less concerned about civilian casualties. That shows the moral weakness on the part of Israel, the lack of moral clarity on the part of Israel, and by the way, the West. And by the way, the West. On the other hand, my objective assessment of it is clearly they're bending over backwards in unprecedented ways in the history of warfare to prevent civilian casualties. Now, to turn that into genocide is to do something entirely unprecedented in the history of considering the morality of warfare. It's not even Christian, the way the Christians approached it, frankly. So this moral confusion, this collective subjectivity is really what it is. You see, it's the Palestinian truth, the Arab truth, or still worse, this committee of experts who tells us what genocide is when they can't make a clear moral case for what genocide is and isn't and point to the facts that prove their case. There's a difference between murder. There's a difference between murder and genocide. There's a difference between genocide and what Israel is doing right now, in fact. And if we can't make those moral distinctions, heaven help us in the long run, because what we've done is we've sanctioned and encouraged the enemy to go on. We've given him the green light, morally speaking, the moral sanction to go on. But as a side note here that we've been discussing, heaven help those poor soldiers trying to make moral sense of what they did.
Yeah, again, I'm thinking about sort of like an individual soldier who, I mean, in most cases, I think today, a bunch of reservists are being called up to go into, I think specifically because of the Gaza City operation. We have a super chat from West. Thank you so much. And I mean, again, or similarly to what you've said about Vietnam. I mean, imagine um you know, you are young, 18, 19, I'm not sure from which age was drafted, but let's say 22-year-old, right? You're drafted into Vietnam. You have to fight a terrible war where Viet Cong is everywhere within the trees, doing terrible things when it comes to either the torture methods they use or even the general way of fighting. You manage to somehow survive that, probably lose some of your friends that you've met, and then you go home and be called a baby killer. I mean, again, we need moral clarity. I mean, now more than ever, we need understanding of yeah, basically what it means to what really war is and what it means to fight it
War is
properly.
hell.
Yeah.
War is horrors.
Again,
Horrors will
even we
happen.
don't even need the direct killing. I think from day one, there should have been a complete embargo and let them figure out what they want to do with that. If they cannot produce, again, if let's say on October 7th, and I think that was the case, that basically everything was shut down and Gaza was quickly running out of food. I mean, what does that say about the society? That if a border is closed around you, well, this is sort of like an argument against globalism. I'm not for, ending global trade. I think global trade is a good thing, but Gaza wasn't getting their food from trading. It was
Nor am I
getting it from
generally in favor of
foreign aid.
starvation. I wouldn't cut people off so that they're starved. No, except in this context. It is absolutely appropriate. Now, get this, war is a horrible thing. War will involve intentional starvation sometimes. Yeah, it will involve
Well,
intentional
in
starvation.
in usual scenarios, they usually don't. Both World War One and World War Two ended because Germany was in World War One. Germany was actually feeling the fact that there was a complete embargo on Germany, and they were lacking food, and there was to be starvation. Again, we are talking about a government like the Kaiserreich has already ended by the time, and like a whole government was replaced, like
Right,
system
the
of
Kaiser's
government was replaced.
abdicated. Right,
The whole system of government was, and they were still feeling sort of
Yes,
what's coming. In Japan, the same way. The
exactly,
Japanese people were starving, or were
exactly.
again on the brink of starvation. That was what ended the war.
That's what ends the war and brings them, to surrender and total surrender. That's what you're facing. And that's the consequence they have to realize. Force, when you initiated force in the kind of scale that Japan and Germany engaged in by invading Poland and France, by invading China, by attacking Pearl Harbor, by invading the Philippines and Southeast Asia, these powers told us the aggressive threat that they posed. So it's perfectly reasonable to say, no, your home population, whether they're guilty, individually guilty or not, they're part of this war machine that is invading the rest of the world and posing a threat to the rest of the world. It is perfectly reasonable to cut them off and say, look, no food if you continue to attack. Until you surrender unconditionally, you will not eat. And we'll do everything we can to starve your war machine. And it will bring an end to it all the quicker. If you don't like that starvation, if you don't like the war is a terrible thing to have happen. If you don't want that state to persist, then what you do is you take every reasonable step to end it. End it as quickly as possible. War involves horrible behavior. The aggressor has dictated the uncivilized terms on which we can have to interact with them. They have dictated the terms: force, violence. They would not hesitate to do even worse. We must respond. And we're not responding in kind necessarily. We shouldn't, for example, set up concentration camps with German people in them and engage in the kind of things that went on at Auschwitz and Dachau. No, that would be an inappropriate and not rationally related act of uh, retaliation, but not a reasonable one. But every act that is reasonably designed to bring the enemy to its knees is permitted. Every one. It's whether or not it affects so-called innocent civilians or not. It is the fault of the aggressor. War is hell, as I say. And unless you have moral clarity about this, your soldiers are going to, well, obviously, the first and most important thing is the policy of the governments. And a warped view of morality of this kind is going to disarm, and we can see it. We can see how America was disarmed after 9/11 by trying to approach wars that way. We can see how Israel is morally disarmed by trying to approach wars where you appease the international community, the collective subjective view of intrinsic morality. When you see that happen, there is a moral confusion that is more important than anything else. But I would say that another important byproduct, since we brought it up here today, is the psychological impact on the soldiers, who must, for the rest of their lives, be wrestling with, my God, did I kill that child immorally, or did I help save civilization and a bunch more other children? Um, yeah.
We have a
Moral
super
clarity is vital when it comes to war.
we have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. A super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says there is no Palestine. And I nodded my head for the people on the podcast. We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He's asking, is Razi away? And Razi in the chat says coming back soon. So you got your answer there. With that, think I wanted to bring up something more, but we've already went on much longer than we usually do. So, but I think it was an interesting discussion, and I think to summarize it is that yeah, when fighting a war, the moral clarity of understanding why we are doing it is not only important for the country to defend itself, but for the soldiers who are fighting that war to actually have the confidence to do so. Because I cannot imagine you know, doing my work, even the most banal sort of smallest parts of my work, I couldn't imagine doing that without having an understanding why I'm doing it. I cannot imagine killing somebody with having no idea why I'm doing it. James, any last thoughts from you? And where can people find you?
It does show the power of philosophy, the importance of philosophy, the life and death importance of philosophy could not be more vividly on display when it comes to warfare and the policymakers during warfare and the soldiers during warfare. The imperative nature of philosophy. And there was no one who understood the power and importance of philosophy like Ayn Rand, the greatest moral philosopher of many, many centuries, perhaps since the ancient Greeks. Please, you're getting a perspective here at the Ayn Rand Center UK that you won't get anywhere else, because it is informed by a rational, objective morality, one that has moral clarity. And so you will find me here at the Ayn Rand Center UK, and if you're a member, you can take part in seminars that we do, in-depth studies of objectivism, the works of Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff. I'm involved in some of that. So please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK. And furthermore, in October, I'm going to be at the Irreplaceable Spark Conference. And if there's any chance, any way you can beg, borrow, maybe, okay, don't steal. But if there's any way you can beg, borrow, or finagle your way to Orange County, California in October of this year, please do so. It's going to be an objectivist conference unlike any that has ever been.
And we also have the Atlas Shrugged book club coming up later today, where we'll be covering all of part one of Atlas Shrugged. Basically, we've already done about 60 sessions on the part one, chapter by chapter, session by session, and now we're sort of like doing a summary of part one, which is non-contradictions, non-contradictory, I think is the part one name. So definitely thematic. So make sure to become also YouTube member or website member to get access to that. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye-bye.
Be safe.